Welcome to Conversations with Tom Shorkey. Conversations explores the past, the present, and the future of the communities in which we live through the eyes of interesting individuals. Now let's join our host, Tom Shorkey.
Welcome to Conversations. I'm your host for today's program, Tom Shorkey. With me today is a longtime fixture in the city of St. Clair, a man who's been part of this community officially for about 39 years when you add up his special duty before his regular assignment. But with me today is our retiring police chief, Rick Jefferson. Welcome to the show today, Rick.
Glad to meet you, Tom.
Now, Rick, people have seen you in and about St. Clair for years. As we talked, you were a special policeman for 6 or 7 years before you hit the main force, probably by the mid-'80s, ended up over 9 years as police chief.
Yeah.
But our audience at home doesn't know the background story. Tell us in a couple of sentences, where'd Rick Jefferson grow up?
I actually grew up in Port Huron area. I lived down in the city of Port Huron off Howard Street and attended Woodrow Wilson School till I was in the 2nd grade. And then my folks built a house out on Westland Drive off West Water in Port Huron Township.
Well, back in the day, if you lived over by Woodrow Wilson School, for people who know Port Huron now, they just think of the Birchwood Mall, and they think of a lot of rental housing in the heart of the city. But that Howard, Court Street area around Woodrow Wilson was the place to live. That was the neighborhood.
Yeah, there was judges and large families, and it was a really nice neighborhood. In fact, I was a kid like that. I hated to leave that neighborhood. It was, when we went out to West Water, it was kind of like going way out in the country at that time.
Now, West Water out in Port Huron Township. Yeah. So if you were at Woodrow at one point, then what, Michigami's out that way?
Yeah, Michigami School. I attended Michigami School from my elementary from 2nd to 5th. And then we went to Chippewa for middle school.
In Chippewa, for our listeners at home, they go, Chippewa, where the heck is Chippewa? We say, if you want to stop at Menards
that's exactly
pick
where
up
it was.
Some tools,
that's where Chippewa School was, yeah, where Menards are. And then from there, I attended Port Huron Northern High School in my high school years up until my junior year, and that's when the school districts started redistricting the school. And part of us from Port Huron and part of us from Port Huron Northern went to, which was the Port Huron Catholic School, which became Port Huron Central. And I was the first graduating class of 1973 at Port Huron Central.
And now I believe it's Port Huron Middle School.
I believe it is.
So for the record, Rick, it looks like wherever you went to school, they closed
her down.
Now, one of 10 kids in Port Huron, you tell me.
Yeah.
Early 70s, was kind of a recession type situation. Where did you end up traveling to get a job after high school?
After high school, I had my older brother was a nurse anesthetist, and he lived in Middlesboro, Kentucky, which is right at Cumberland Gap. I mean, you can actually stand in the 3 states at one time on a curve there. And I went down there in my summer of my junior year because he got me a job as a scrub tech at one of the hospitals. And then I went back to school my senior year, and at that time it was like a small recession going on. There wasn't a lot of work here to do. So I ended up going back down there to live with him, and him and another partner began a pet store in the mall down there. And of course, we sold birds and dogs and cats and fish and whatnot. And so I kind of was the guy that gave the job to get this off the ground and running, so to speak. And so I spent a year down there with him getting that going. And then lo and behold, there was a nice young good-looking girl down there in Middlesboro, Kentucky that worked in a department store, would come over on her break to look at the animals. And about 6 months after that, she became my wife of 43 years now.
Well, that's a great story. So you're in Middlesboro, Tennessee. Kentucky.
Yeah.
And you started looking around and you're thinking, hey, we're going to have a family, we're going to do some things.
Right.
We ought to probably move back to Michigan and get out of the pet store business.
Yep, we did.
A little bit in Kalamazoo, and then you came over this way because You had a relative that
Right.
they were building Faith Medical Center.
Faith Medical was built, and my aunt, Mary Jane Short, at that time it's Mary Jane Hay now, she had the nursing home going on, and I really didn't know exactly what kind of career path at that time. I thought maybe some in the medical or whatnot, so I figured this would be great. And she gave both my wife and I a job at Faith Medical, working as an aide and orderly there. And so we did that for a number of years, and I thought, well, I got to do something that's going to put more bread and butter on the table. So then I had a brother who was a retired Michigan State trooper, and in talking to him, he kind of led me to the direction of, you might want to choose law enforcement.
And back in the day, and we're talking in the 70s, early or middle to late 70s, were you living in St. Clair at that time, or were you in Port Huron, or where?
No,
were
I
you
was living in St. Clair at that time. Yeah.
And but in order to be a police officer in St. Clair, there was kind of a path you had to follow.
Right.
Tell our listeners, if back in the 70s you wanted to be an officer in St. Clair, what did you have to do?
It wasn't unusual, because most of the departments did this back in those days, but they had reserves. St. Clair, they called them the Special Police Department. And what they were the voluntary guys that were in this group, and they assisted the regulars in doing crowd control and parades and any special events. And they also we actually had a riding schedule that you had to put in so many hours a month. And we actually wore the same uniform, carried sidearms, and we were like the partners to the regulars. And then when an opening would come up, you interviewed, and then if we had somebody qualified within the reserves, they were hired by the city and then sent to the police academy.
So you were a young guy. You spent what? How many years with the Special Police?
I was on there 7 years.
7 years before you got the call.
Right.
But in the meantime, you had a pretty decent job up at American Tape in
I worked at
Marysville.
American Tape in Marysville.
So it was kind of where the rubber hit the road. In order to go to police academy, you had to quit your job.
I had to make a decision.
Tell us about that.
And at that time, I had 2 young daughters and a wife, and I had the opportunity to go to the police academy. And what happens is you are hired with the conditional offer that if you successfully pass the academy, then you got the job. If not, then you don't have the job. And at that time, I was making pretty decent money at the American Tape. And boy, that was a big soul searching, like, do I just leave this to go make less money, and with the opportunity to make more money in the future? And I can remember talking to some of the supervisors and asking them at American Tape, if I don't make the academy, can I come back? And they go, no, you got to make a decision. I made the decision, and I'm glad I did, because everything else turned out pretty good at the end.
So you got through the academy and all the homework you had to do.
Oh, boy.
And your own typing?
Oh, yeah. We'd take notes all day, and then you had to put it all in typewritten form at night. And back in those days, we didn't have all the benefits of computers and enough, so you did a lot of burning the midnight oil, and the wife stood there and helped me put that all together. And a lot of times she'd be doing the typing so I could get some sleep, because I had to go to school the very next morning. But we successfully got through that, and I took my oath of office in April of 1985.
Great.
Yeah.
So you were an officer, and when we talked earlier, you've probably worked for 3 or 4 different police chiefs along the way.
Yep.
And then about 9.5 years ago, they tapped you for the job.
Right, they did.
Now, when somebody, it's interesting, when somebody has kind of worked their way up, and they've seen the good things and maybe the things they wouldn't do if they were ever in charge. All of a sudden, they're the boss.
Right.
Was it an adjustment?
It was. I came up through the ranks, a patrol officer, and then I was promoted to sergeant. And then what they did right before they retired, they did an early buyout for a couple of the guys. So at that time, I could actually retire, and they kind of came to me and said, you know, we really don't want you to retire. We got some plans for you. And I go, well. So then I retired and came back contractual as a captain. And at that time, that was right before Chief Don Barnum was getting ready to retire. And so that's when they tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, we'd like to have you become the next chief. And I really had no plans to become the chief. So, I mean, I really had to do some soul searching because that's a big undertaking. You go from taking orders to giving orders, and you're responsible for pretty much the biggest budget of the whole city is your police department.
Well, and that is the thing with many small towns, Rick, have actually disbanded their police departments and contract with the sheriff or whatever because it is a big chunk of the budget.
It is a big chunk of change. That's been a concern for off and on for years that would happen. I'm so thankful of the support that the community of St. Clair shows their police and fire department. They're very supportive of us. Not too long ago, they had a fundraiser. The American Legion took upon them to do that for us, and I was just shocked the number of people that came forward to support the services that we do. So it's very befitting to see that they consider you the backbone of the community, and they're very supportive. So it's nice that seeing that St. Clair can still afford to keep their police.
Well, and it's almost like a catch-22 on the financial end, because to have a full complement of officers, which a city of this size is probably, about 9, 10, 11 people in that?
Normally we would have between 9 and 10 full-time officers, but with the recession that we went through just now, a couple years back, everybody took cuts. And the city and the union negotiated a plan of, instead of hiring another full-time, to hire 3 part-time officers. And so that's where they're at right now, with 7 full-time and the chief and 3 part-time officers.
And then part-time, because that probably is a money saver, because they probably don't get the benefits.
They don't get the benefits.
Can somebody live on part-time, or do they have to have
ideally, you would get the part-time, and you try to find somebody who's maybe retired from a different department that wants to come here and just work part-time, because then their benefits come from that department. But the problem is majority of the part-time hours are like the midnight shift, weekends and holidays, and a lot of those officers don't want to do that. So then you get younger officers in here, and you get them trained, and then all of a sudden a full-time job comes up, and they're gone to that.
Well, see, it sounds like a tough way either way.
Yeah,
if you hire a veteran retired from some other department, it's part-time and maybe not the best hours, and then they have their way of doing business, et cetera. But if you hire a rookie and they're part-time and you train them and they like the business, the next thing you know,
they're gone.
They tell you the sheriff department just called with a full-time job.
That's what they're doing up there.
St. Clair has a lot of big events, Rick. I mean, in summertime especially, fireworks, boat races, art fair, probably a little calmer than those other two, but
it's a big undertaking.
How do you police that?
It's a big undertaking. The fireworks in itself, we have thousands of people that come to this town just for the fireworks. We start planning that a month or 2 before the actual event there. We go over everything that needs to be done. We depend on help from other PDs, your sheriff department, your state police, Marysville, Port Huron, even Richmond sends over officers to help us do that. That's one night event. The boat race, we usually start planning that in April, last part of April, first part of May. That's a big undertaking. That's a big deal. Several meetings are planned to bring it all together, and we always breathe a big sigh of relief on the last day of that one.
Now, is there, probably in conjunction with the fire department, but you see these big crises that happen, and a lot of times in small towns and whatever. St. Clair
this year was
trained for those sorts of things?
We do. We have Homeland Security grant money. This year, this past year, was the first year that we actually were nudged by Washington that you need to turn around and prepare for soft targets.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you got down there at all this year, but this is the first year where we actually, Raymond's Trucking donated several of their big dump trucks with trailers, and we put them on both ends of M29, so to just kind of make sure that we wouldn't have somebody with a bus driving through or trying to hurt people. So that's all taken into consideration. We work with Canada during the boat race because part of their boat race is on their side. So they're over here at our meetings, and all levels of government are involved in putting that together.
Well, in the summer, if you hang out around the Pine River at all, you see Homeland Security, Sheriff Department,
Yeah.
Coast Guard.
Right, right. Yeah.
Looks like we're well prepared on the water anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that is true.
You know, being a law enforcement officer in a small town, there's challenges for the guys and the women that are on your staff. What's the hardest part about being a police officer and living in the community?
Well, you know, yeah, you get to know everybody. Everybody knows you. They know where you live. They know that, hey, you're the chief. I mean, it's not unusual to have my doorbell ring and have somebody go, hey, I'm having a problem. Can you talk to me? Or might be out in my backyard cutting my grass, and all of a sudden someone's walking over to talk to you. I mean, that goes with the title. That's part of the job. But being a police officer, that after a while you get to know everybody. So all of a sudden you're speeding, you're getting stopped, and now you got to make a decision. Do I give this guy who I know a ticket, or do I let him go? So you got to have a fine line there. When I'm in uniform, I'm a police officer. When I'm not in uniform, okay, we can be friends, but I got a job to do. The city's hired me to keep it safe, and that's what you got to do. And sometimes it's hard to do in a town of our size.
You think that 25-mile-an-hour speed limit on Kearney Drive fills the coffers? I mean, I see
no, a lot of people go, that's a big speed trap, and it really isn't. We don't sit out there. I mean, we're out there, but they're not pulling everybody over going 26, 27 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That was put together back when they built Gregg Park. That's kind of a state road there, and you either had to build up an overpass for pedestrian crossing, or you had to lower the speed limit. Well, at that time, the homes were starting to be built out there, and it was agreed upon the city fathers saying, well, we need to slow the traffic down a little bit. It's a city street. It's like 7th Street or J Street. Any city street, unless it's marked, is 25 miles an hour. It just seems like it takes you forever because it's such a long route.
And a couple stop signs along the way, too. What we've seen sometimes on the national news and whatever is a police officer under stress, and probably one of the scariest things is pulling somebody over in the dark, not knowing sure what's going on, that there ends up to be a shooting or a taser issued. Do you have rules like for your people when to use a taser and when you don't?
We do. Just like when you use your firearm, when you don't. Our officers are constantly going through training. We go send them to schools constantly. They're always, every year they have to requalify with their weapons, and with the tasers is just another tool to use less than deadly force. So there's certain times that you wouldn't use a taser. Of course, you're not if a guy's standing in gasoline or something, or standing in the water, you sure wouldn't do it. So there's protocols when you would use a taser and when not to. But it's actually been very beneficial to keep the officer safe, and also to keep the suspect safe too. It's it's easier to control.
Who's been influential to Rick Jefferson throughout your life or career?
Well, there's several people. Of course, my wife has been my biggest background. It takes a special woman to be married to a cop. Let me tell you. There's 6 of us boys and 4 girls in my family. So my older brothers were always there for me, and Judge John Cummings. When I first became in law enforcement, I knew him back in the days that working at Faith Medical. In fact, his wife Sarah was the director of nurses at Faith Medical, so I got to know him. And a lot of times during my career, I'd go talk to him and, hey, this is what's going on here. What kind of direction can you give me? So he's been pretty good helping me over these years. Yeah.
When people look back in a few years and they go, oh, that's Rick Jefferson. He used to be the chief here. How do you want to be remembered in St. Clair?
Well, it's interesting. I guess my thing is I just want to be remembered as I was a fair guy. I treated people fair. I tried to do what was right for the city. I tried to be a great ambassador. You know, it's just even in the officers on the department, you know, they're a great bunch of people. I have nothing but respect for the guys on this department. And I'm so glad that nothing seriously happened on my watch. That's the biggest success right there. But, you know, I wanted to be fair. Like I told him, I said, it might not always agree with me, but we're going to do what's the most fairest thing to do. So I guess that'd be the thing I want to remember is, hey, he was a fair guy.
Mm-hmm. Great. If a young family was kind of looking for a place to live or buy a home or whatever, how would you recommend St. Clair? Why would you tell somebody they ought to come to St. Clair?
Well, I raised my family here in St. Clair. St. Clair to me is just like the home away from home. I mean, it's the most walkable town I've ever been in. I mean, people are constantly using the bike path. I use it all the time. My grandkids come with me and use it. It's just a nice, safe community for the most part. There's a lot of events in this town. I've never seen a town that has more parades and more activity going on than the city of St. Clair. And it's just a nice community-oriented bunch of great people in this town. I mean, so I would definitely
highly recommend it.
I would highly recommend St. Clair, yes.
Now, Rick, you've spent almost 40 years in this area, and mostly dedicated to law enforcement. But you're a young man.
Yeah.
What's the next chapter for Rick Jefferson?
Well, I'm going to take off some time and think about that. You know, yes, I'm a young man. I'm going to be 63 years here in the next couple of months, but that's old to be on the street as a police officer.
Oh, sure.
And I still feel that I've got things to do, but I'm just going to take off this winter, and I got some good honeydew jobs that my wife reminds me of, and I'm going to sit back and weigh up the options and before I make the decision what the next chapter with. But I hope it's still going to be in this area.
Great. Well, for our audience at home, I hope you've got a few insights into a man who has been an integral part of building our community, keeping it safe, and obviously from his last few comments, a real cheerleader for our area. I think the city of St. Clair owes a debt of gratitude to Rick Jefferson for the amount of time and effort he has put in to making this community a great place to live. And on behalf of Cable Channel 6 at watchctv.org, I'd like to thank Rick for being our guest today.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chief.
You've been watching Conversations with Tom Shorkey. Conversations explores the past, the present, and the future of the communities in which we live through the eyes of interesting individuals. If you have an idea for a future conversation, please contact us at www.watchctv.org. Thanks for watching Conversations with Tom Shorkey.